Hey guys, Dr. Prometheus here with our non-spoiler review or non-spoiler thoughts of Halo Infinite. So we'll start off by saying we haven't had a Halo game in 3 or 4 years, and there's a lot of nostalgia for me with Halo. And personally, this felt and brought back a lot of that nostalgia that I had from the original trilogy, 1 through 3, but also came out with some good stuff for that was pretty comparable from 4 to 5. So, kind of give you a little idea. Master Chief, again, there's no spoilers. Master Chief, again on his own, with an AI, going out and doing what he does best, and that is fight on a Halo ring. Some good stuff. The story, while some might say is lacking in content size, I think the fact that there's an open world aspect takes that 6 to 8 hours, maybe 10 hours, depending on how fast you can get through it. But let's just say that 10-hour campaign or so, which is standard for a Halo game, seems much smaller when you have an open world and you're moving about collecting things in the open world, doing missions, capturing fobs, things like that. It kind of makes you feel that there's less story because you're doing more exploration and collecting and things like that. And so just be aware that what you'll have to collect, a lot of the power-ups, things like that, to upgrade the suit, is going to take away a little bit from the feel of the campaign. What I personally did is every segment where I was able to unlock a new area or was able to go into, I did all of the open world stuff first and then went straight campaign. From there, which actually helped the flow of the campaign, where the last portion of my stream, the last 5 hours or so, 6 hours of part 5 was all main story. So it had a lot of the chunk in there, and it's going to feel like there's not as much story from the other games, but in reality, this is what happens in open world games. I understand that. The lore behind this, I would say that they did a pretty good job keeping to a lot of the books, a lot of the games, kind of a rewrite, soft reboot of sorts after 4 and 5. And we have some of those storylines wrapped up in a bow. Well, not maybe the most perfect bow, but it is wrapped up, and I do like the fact that they actually do that. Kind of give some reasoning on wrapping up 5, which people got a mixed review on. I personally liked all the Halos, but that's just me being a Halo fan more than anything. Gameplay was pretty good. The environments were absolutely awesome. The enemies, I like the fact that they put dynamic HVTs in there, so you got to see some specialized weapons of the other types that are in the game. The AI was hilarious at times from the standpoint of the voice lines from the grunts, the voice lines of the elites to the brutes to the grunts, the jackals, also in how they interact when talking to you. Hilarious. When you die, they'll say voice lines towards you, things like that. It's really cool, but what tops it all off is if you're going in, say, long range, the enemies will actually pick up long range weapons and engage you with them. So gone is the idea that you can just stay outside their detecting range or anything like that and just snipe, which in some cases you can, but gone is those days. which makes it a bit tougher, but also more rewarding when you play some areas. Hunters are the bane of my existence in this one, and I still don't know how to deal with it. So, with that, it's pretty cool with all of that, and at the end of the day, story with no spoilers. I thought the story was pretty good, pretty decent, but also taking the fact that we already have information that 343 has said this is going to be a game that expands over time, over its 10 or so years lifespan. So we're going to see a lot more content, whatever form that comes in. I don't know. The first one's already kind of been soft reported, leaked, that whole thing from people. So there's a lot of good stuff with Halo, and this campaign was really fun. I'll go more into a review with spoilers that kind of go into that point from there in a different video, and we'll kind of go into that. So actually, I'll do it right now. So that's going to be the end of the non-spoiler review. It's your 6 minutes here. I'm going to go into about 6 minutes of spoiler stuff and what I would like to see changed. If you haven't, what I would have personally enjoyed in some aspects, but also some story elements as well. So I'm going to give you guys a second to click off the video if you want to from there. But you've been warned, we're going to be talking about spoilers for here on out. So, for the story, I would say it's good, but it's not as good as it could be. Meaning that they tried to capture the nostalgia of 1, where the Pillar of Autumn is crashing down, you have to evacuate that whole thing. But that section isn't playable. It's a cutscene. So I was kind of disappointed in the fact that we couldn't fight through the Infinity, and you could make it in a storyline where you actually lost to Atriox, and then a flash portion there to a 6-month period, and you got to go through the whole story with that. I would have enjoyed that portion, but having it just a cutscene was unfulfilling in many cases, especially for something like the Infinity. Like, a lot of people got attached to it. I was pretty attached to it. I like the lore behind Halo, Captain Lasky, all those guys. These are the same people that are also from Halo Wars 2. So I mean, previous Halos 4, 5. There's not much talked about with those characters other than Atriox and some of the characters maybe from Halo Wars 2, but really there's not much wrapped up there, and you don't see what happens really too much to Lasky. You have no idea. To Halsey, no idea. Blue Team's on a separate mission. You get it in a lore, a recording, when that could have been a cutscene at the beginning of the game. You get lore surrounding just Locke, Team Osiris from 5. But you also have voice lines that counter those. So there's a lot of confusion on within the fan base at this point of what's going on with some of the characters, whether they like them or hate them. They just wanted to know what was going on with some of those outside characters, and this game kind of focused on Master Chief, Cortana, and what is the weapon from there. I will avoid any deep spoilers on anything like that, but that was weird in that kind of brings down the story and the fact that a lot of the information are in audio logs that you have to collect, and there's probably at least a dozen audio logs that are just scattered throughout the world that you would have to search for, as opposed to them being close to something, making it easier. So that's one thing that I wish that would have been addressed more directly in the game. Another one I would say is what they are going to do is future co-op replay missions, which I know replay missions is something they've confirmed that they'll do in the future and actually patch in co-op. I've heard rumor that that might be a thing in there. I know there's a bug that can kind of force it to happen, which is pretty cool. Like, this would be a great game to play with a teammate. There's a lot of areas, especially with hunters, that are very difficult, and a lot of the tactics from previous Halos don't work, particularly on hunters. The boss battles are particularly awesome, especially with like elites. They can be frustrating at times, but frustrating from the sense that you're figuring out the process, but once you figure that out and you have a little luck on your side, those boss battles become very rewarding, and I do like that entire idea that they have in there. I don't know how they're going to do it for the DLC and things like that, if there's going to be boss fights, but I'm really excited with that. One thing also is this is very lore heavy towards the end, and it follows a lot of the Forerunner saga, I think it is, in the books, and talks about precursors and forerunners and the flood, the things like that before the firing of the Halos by the Forerunners. And there's a lot of lore in there that if you don't know about it, you won't actually be able to connect that. So there's a lot of aspects where you have to be deep in Halo lore to really understand what's going on in some aspects, or what some events or references are. One of it being, one of the references that they give is offensive bias towards the end of the game. In the cutscene, they throw him out there. However, if you haven't read those books or have any context, you don't know who that is. So I wish there was more Forerunner lore in the game in some capacity, or at least some references or an ability to see or hear some background of that, because there's a lot of that heavy, and you don't really introduce for any of that. They kind of did something like that in, I believe, 4 with the Didac, where you went into a library and you had a slight cutscene with what was a Forerunner, and he kind of, or she kind of gave you a couple background hints in that game. In this one, there's nothing like that, which makes it a bit more difficult. The weapons, I love the weapon types, the weapon differences. You have some armored weapons, which is pretty cool to see some of that, like armor rounds, things of that nature. Flying vehicles, which made the game a whole lot easier to traverse in open world. We kind of need that. And one thing that also was very weird is the Marine NPCs are just acting like generic NPCs, and there's no real feel or connection to the UNSC as a whole in this, and I'm not sure if that's intended, but really there's no communication at all. Well, there's some story elements presented that kind of give you a hint why. However, humanity literally fought a war against the Covenant, lost much of their Covenant of space taken over by the Covenant, in which they've taken it back because of the Covenant Civil War. And you're telling me that they could... There's no ability to have it. It just feels weird compared to what the first 3 games were, and kind of the idea that there was a risk involved, and maybe that's kind of told later in DLCs, but I didn't feel there was any real risk like there was in Halo 1 through 3. Like, you're fighting for humanity's survival. 4, you're fighting the Didact, yes, but you're learning about Cortana, you're saving Cortana, that sort of thing, and you're doing a couple of things like that, which is cool. And then you go into 5, and you're fighting Cortana and trying to stop that. And there's a lot of background information in that's not presented in those games, which continues that trend in Infinite on not actually introducing those things unless you've actually read the books. So, spoiler for Halo 5, Cortana is infected with the logic bias or the logic routine by Gravemind, and you have no background to that in those games. Well, then they introduce the idea of other AIs being messed with the same way back in Forerunner time, before the Halos were fired, and they don't really talk about that. So there's a lot of lore background-wise, and I wish it was presented to the player from a newbie basis on that. So I would recommend, if you end up playing Halo Infinite, that either after, or probably after, that you actually look at some of those videos on YouTube that kind of do that whole thing and talk about the Forerunners, Mendicant bias, offensive bias, precursors, things like that, and kind of explain what exactly happened in the Forerunner Saga books before the Forerunners launched Halo and then reseeded the galaxy from there. You'll get a better idea of some of these characters that are introduced, and you'll get a better idea, kind of the idea and possibly where they're going with future DLCs. So that will be it for this. So 6 minutes non-spoiler review and an extra 10 minutes tacked onto that with some of my issues with the game that aren't really big issues per se, because I absolutely love the experience. So that will end this video, guys. Thank you all for joining me. Go and leave a like below, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys next time. Later.